Spring 1943. Near Kursk, the earth still smells of smoke and diesel. The front line is a chaos of mud, iron, and flame. The sun is dim, and the wind carries the taste of scorched metal. By the village of Glinki, a strange machine stands half buried in the road, large, square, and marked with American letters. German soldiers circle it, curious, like men studying something from another world. Das ist kein Panzer, das ist eine Scheune auf Rädern. That's not a tank, it's a barn on wheels. Painted on the side, U.S. Army, M4A2, an American Sherman, supplied to the Red Army through Lend-Lease, abandoned after an artillery barrage. One track blown off, turret jammed at 9 o'clock. The Germans don't yet realize that before them stands a machine that will quietly challenge their entire faith in war. A communications officer from the 9th Army takes photographs. An engineering detachment attached to the Panzer Corps decides to inspect the find. Staff mechanic Oberfeldwebel Brandt opens the hatch and sniffs the air. Riecht nach Benzin, aber läuft wie Diesel. Smells like gasoline, but runs like diesel. The engine, General Motors 6046, two 6-cylinder blocks joined together. The men exchange glances. They're used to powerful but temperamental Maybach engines. This one looks simple, too simple. Command orders the tank sent to Kummersdorf, the secret testing center where T-34s and captured Stuarts have already been studied. 2 Famo half-tracks tow it away. White paint on the hull reads, Nummer 220, nicht zerstören. No, 220, do not destroy. All along the journey, the soldiers joke. Die Amerikaner bauen Traktoren, keine Panzer. The Americans build tractors, not tanks. But those riding on the armor notice something. Even crippled, the tractor holds together. No seams split, no welds crack, no panels rattle loose. Kummersdorf, the heart of German engineering. Here they test everything, from artillery to rocket prototypes. Among the convoy arriving that week is the Sherman. At the gate, a new sign appears. U.S. Panzer. Untersuchung verboten ohne Genehmigung. U.S. Tank. Inspection forbidden without authorization. Engineers from Technisches Amt 6 record it. Object, U.S. medium tank, M4A2, Sherman. Origin, Glinki, Russia. Condition, operational, minor damage. Purpose, comparative testing with Panzer IV and Panther. Senior engineer Dr. Kurt Schäfer circles the tank and notes, Das ist keine Schönheit, aber solid. It's no beauty, but it's solid. The welds are thick and rough, the fittings utilitarian. The steel casting bears marks from the foundry, but nothing creaks, nothing breaks. The Americans don't build beautifully, they build to make it work. Schäfer, lighting a cigarette. German tanks were precision instruments, like watches made of steel. Every bolt crafted, every curve deliberate. But the Sherman followed another philosophy, a machine any factory could assemble, any crew could repair. Junior engineer Walter Bechtel writes in his diary, Wenn unsere Panzer Musik sind, ist dieser nur ein Hammer, aber schlägt jedes Mal. If our tanks are music, this one is just a hammer, but it strikes every time. Inside the commander's hatch, space, real space. No cramped corners, no contorted levers. Everything labeled, painted, standardized. Even the instruction sheet glued to the inner wall. Der Feind baut für den Soldaten, wir bauen für die Ingenieure. The enemy builds for soldiers, we build for engineers. When the engine is cleaned and oiled, it starts, on the first try. A deep, steady hum fills the hangar. The men stare. One whispers, Vielleicht ist das die wahre Überlegenheit. Maybe this is the real superiority. The transmission astonishes them too. No complex gear reduction, no heavy clutch. A fluid coupling, smooth, automatic. Like a car, one technician laughs. Schaefer taps the hull with a hammer. The sound, dull, even. He notes, material homogener als gedacht, metal more uniform than expected. The armor, 51 millimeters thick, less than a Panther's, but sloped efficiently. Inside, edges are rounded, safer for the crew. Praktisch, menschlich, anders. Practical, humane, different. In the Kummersdorf canteen, the engineers argue. Some call the Sherman crude, others call it genius. The Americans don't invent, they simplify. And that's why they'll win, Schaefer replies. By nightfall, the tank still stands on the platform, its green paint streaked with grease and fingerprints. Schaefer closes his notebook. Wir werden ihn morgen fahren. Tomorrow, we drive it. No one there could know that this test would mark the quiet end of the German engineering myth. The Sherman would teach them that reliability is stronger than perfection. The next morning, when the engine roars again and the tractor begins to move under its own power, some of the men finally understand America would not win with cannons, but with logic. The camera lingers on the moving tracks, mud splattering, the steel alive again. A German officer raises his Leica and captures the moment. The frame trembles, because this is more than a photograph. It is the instant when respect replaces arrogance. Manchmal beginnt die Wahrheit mit einem Lächeln über den Feind. Sometimes, truth begins with a smile at the enemy. April 10th, 1943, Kummersdorf Proving Ground, south of Berlin. At dawn, a heavy transport convoy rumbles through the gates. Two Famo half-tracks drag a strange prize, a wide, clumsy machine with a square turret and the words U.S. Army, faintly visible beneath the mud. The duty officer frowns, scanning the papers. Ein amerikanischer Panzer, erbeutet bei Kursk. An American tank, captured near Kursk. On the turret's roof, the outline of a faded Soviet star remains, painted over in white with Nunya 220. The tank is parked on test pad number 3, beside a captured T-34. From this day on, the Sherman officially becomes a test subject. A group of engineers approaches the platform. White coats, folders, cigarettes, and the faint smirk of superiority. At the center stands Dr. Kurt Schaefer, project director. He studies the tank and mutters, Die Amerikaner bauen Möbel. The Americans build furniture. Laughter ripples through the group until he opens the hatch and looks inside. Then the laughter stops. Inside, space. Labeled panels, instructions bolted to the walls, every lever marked, every handle color-coded. German machines are built like riddles. This one explains itself. Engineer Walter Bechtel whispers, Es ist wie ein Traktor, aber für Soldaten. It's like a tractor, only for soldiers. They begin with the suspension. Everything comes apart easily. Standardized bolts, removable road wheels, simple VVSS springs. A mechanic remarks in disbelief. Alles gleich, keine Überraschungen. Everything's the same. No surprises. Schaefer notes in his journal, American philosophy, replace everything, repair nothing. That single sentence will later appear in post-war engineering reports. When they open the electrical junction box, they freeze. Every wire is numbered and color-coded. Printed labels, factory typography, no guesswork. Unsere Panzer sind wie Orchester, dieser wie ein Radio. Our tanks are orchestras, this one is a radio. The Sherman's General Motors 646 twin diesel looks crude but effective. Two engines coupled through one gearbox. Zwei Motoren, ein Herz, Schaefer says. Two engines, one heart. They turn the starter. The motor comes to life instantly. A low, steady rumble fills the hangar. No one speaks. Läuft, ohne Gebet. It runs without a prayer. Captain of the technical office dictates the report. Date, 10th April 1943. Location, Kummersdorf West, Pad 3. Object, Sherman M4A2, US. Observation, mechanical function stable, noise minimal, idle smooth. Remark, unexpectedly reliable start procedure. Then he adds quietly, Vielleicht ist das die wahre Überlegenheit. Perhaps this is the real superiority. Some still sneer. They call the Sherman a peasant's machine. Too thick, too plain, too industrial. Schaefer answers, Kompromiss, это и есть победа. Compromise is victory. When the mechanics test the gearbox, the shift is smooth, effortless, almost gentle. Bechtel writes in his notes, fährt sich wie Auto, nicht wie Waffe. Drives like a car, not a weapon. Beside it, a Panzer IV refuses to start. The engine coughs, dies. A mechanic slams the dashboard in frustration. The contrast hangs in the air. Unsere Kunst stirbt an ihrer Schönheit. Our art dies of its own beauty. The next day, the Sherman drives onto the test field. Tracks hiss through the mud. The driver turns the wheel. The tank glides. No jerks, no strain. A Kummersdorf technician grins. Fährt wie Butter. It drives like butter. Even climbing a slope, the engine doesn't falter. Unmöglich, someone murmurs. That evening, Schaefer sits at his desk and writes, Today, for the first time in my life, I saw a machine that doesn't demand obedience from man. It helps him. Bechtel says quietly, Doctor, if we built machines like this, we wouldn't have lost. Schaefer replies, If we built machines like this, we wouldn't have started. Night falls over the proving ground. The Sherman cools on the pad, its armor gleaming in the moonlight. A mechanic looks at it and says, hat eine Seele. It has a soul. For the first time in the war, German engineers feel not pride, but respect. For the enemy, for the idea, for a machine that simply does what it was meant to do. The camera glides along the hull, mud streaks, oil drips, paper tags reading, Behalten, keep. Stillness, no triumph, no music, only understanding. Sie lachten zuerst, dann hörten sie zu. They laughed first, then they listened. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, April 1943. A light fog hangs over the concrete yard. The air smells of diesel, oil, and cold steel. The Sherman, marked in white as Object Nummer 220, stands motionless in the center of the courtyard. Around it, mechanics, engineers, photographers. Everything is ready to expose the inner workings of the machine that made a nation of engineers doubt themselves. Dr. Kurt Schaefer holds a notebook and says quietly, Heute sehen wir, woraus der Feind gemacht ist. Today, we will see what our enemy is made of. The engine hatch is unbolted first. The clatter of tools, the groan of metal. Beneath the heavy plate lies the heart of the Sherman, the twin-diesel General Motors 6046. A technical officer jokes dryly, Zwei Motoren für einen Panzer, typisch amerikanisch. 2 engines for 1 tank, typically American. But as the engine is lifted and dismantled, the smirks fade into silence. Every surface is labeled, every nut and washer standardized, every part replaceable without adjustment. In German tanks, assembly requires the precision of a jeweler. Each piece has its own shape, its own dimensions. The Sherman follows the opposite creed. Engineer Walter Bechtel nods. Unsere Perfektion tötet Zeit. Ihre Einfachheit spart Leben. Our perfection kills time. Their simplicity saves lives. Schaefer takes a steel sample from the hull to the lab. An hour later, The results arrive. The armor is cast, with high manganese content, stronger than expected. An engineer stares at the report. Sie gießen ganze Panzer, nicht schweißen. They cast whole tanks, not weld them. Schäfer replies, Das ist industrielle Kunst. That is industrial art. He understands now. America's victory is not on the battlefield, but on the factory floor. When they open the wiring box, they freeze again. The wires are not just tidy. They're numbered, color-coded, connected with quick-release plugs. Es ist wie ein Telefonnetz. It's like a telephone network. A schematic, laminated and printed, is glued to the inside of the lid. Schäfer smirks. The Americans assume soldiers can read. Then softly adds, and apparently, they're right. Test driver Gerhard Kruger removes the gearbox. Simple as a tractor's, 3 forward gears, 1 reverse, and a hydraulic torque converter. Rare in Europe. He spins the shaft by hand. It turns smoothly, effortlessly. Man spürt, dass sie an den Fahrer denken. You can feel they thought about the driver. Later, the official report will note, the control system is extremely ergonomic. Driver training time, 5 hours. Panzer IV average, 20 hours. Air filters, radiators, valves. Plain, accessible, repairable. The filter system can be swapped in 10 minutes. In a German tank, it takes an hour. Ein Panzer für Mechaniker, nicht für Götter. A tank for mechanics, not for gods. Inside the crew compartment, the surprise deepens. Spacious, spring-mounted seats, large hatches, big, simple gauges, readable, even in smoke. Die Amerikaner kämpfen nicht mit Muskeln, sondern mit Raum. The Americans fight not with strength, but with space. One engineer writes in the report, crew stations optimized, no sharp edges, psychologically more comfortable than in German tanks. The ammunition racks are sealed in metal canisters, fireproof and shock-resistant. Even direct hits rarely cause explosions. Schäfer whispers, Sie schützen das Leben, nicht nur das Eisen. They protect life, not just steel. The term funktionelle Haltbarkeit, functional durability, appears for the first time in a German report. They begin to see perfect steel and perfect design mean little if the machine cannot endure. Perfection stirbt, function leapt. Perfection dies, function lives. The Sherman is parked beside a Panther. The Panther, stronger, faster, deadlier. But changing its engine takes 36 hours. For the Sherman, 8. Schäfer notes calmly, Das ist keine Niederlage, das ist eine Lektion. This is not defeat, it is a lesson. A week later, a commission arrives from Berlin. Generals listen with tight jaws. One asks coldly, You're telling me the Americans are better than us? Schäfer replies, No, Herr General, but they are wiser in choosing what matters. That evening, as the hangar empties, Schäfer closes his notebook and looks at the Sherman's bare hull. He no longer sees an enemy. He sees an idea, a mechanism that refuses to collapse under the weight of ambition. Das ist keine Maschine. Das ist Philosophie in Stahl. This is not a machine. It is philosophy in steel. The camera pans over the disassembled tank, parts neatly laid on tables, each now labeled in German script. The Sherman has ceased to be foreign. It has become a lesson written in metal. Man kann den Feind besiegen, aber nicht das, was richtig gemacht hat. You can defeat an enemy, but not what he did right. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, April 13th, 1943. A cold morning. Diesel smoke hangs low over the concrete yard, the sky the color of lead. Mechanics fasten the last bolts on the tracks. Officers in long coats and engineers in white lab jackets line up along the edge of the test lane. Schäfer says quietly, "Heute fährt der Feind für uns." Today, the enemy will drive for us. Inside the tank sits test driver Gerhard Krüger, calm, expressionless, a man from the engineering corps. He straps in, inserts the ignition key, turns it. A click, and the Sherman comes alive. No cough, no roar. It simply begins to breathe. Läuft, Schäfer murmurs. It runs. The dashboard lights up, clean, logical, almost civilian. The mechanics exchange glances. Everything works. No ritual, no fine-tuning. It just starts. The tank rolls forward. Tracks crunch over gravel. No jerk, no violent kick from the gearbox. The movement is smooth, weightless, almost effortless. The Germans are silent. In their own machines, the first motion always comes with pain. A lurch, a crack, a fight. Krüger steers left. The tank obeys instantly, sliding through the mud. We butter. Like butter. On the straight stretch, Schäfer raises a flag. Krüger pushes the throttle. The diesel hums deeper, and the Sherman accelerates. 32 kilometers per hour across soft ground. Unthinkable smoothness for a 30-ton machine. Stable, kein Springen. Stable, no bouncing. Dust rises in the morning sun. From the observation tower, a photographer captures every frame. Schäfer writes in his notes, VVSS suspension, crude yet brilliant. It serves simplicity, not prestige. The Sherman takes a sharp corner, its tracks gripping the wet clay without slipping. Krüger shifts into reverse. The transmission clicks softly. No grinding, no protest. Fühlt sich wie Auto. Feels like a car. The Germans are used to the driver being half god, half prisoner, wrestling the machine into obedience. Here, all he needs to do is drive. Concrete blocks, a trench, a low ramp. The Sherman crawls over them like a patient animal. No violence, no struggle, just motion. Through binoculars, Schäfer murmurs, "Keine Anmut, nur Wille." No grace, only will. After 2 hours, the temperature gauge remains steady. Oil clean. No leaks. The test continues. Another 4 hours, non-stop. Mud, rocks, puddles. No failures. Only once the track slips, replaced in 10 minutes. A junior officer jokes, "If we tested a Panther like this, it would already be burning." Schäfer smiles, for the first time that week. That evening, the logbook reads, Fahrprüfung, M4A2, Sherman distance, 45 km duration, 6 hours. Result, no mechanical failures. Notes, unexpectedly smooth operation. Easy handling signed, Dr. K. Schäfer. Later in the lab, Schäfer sips his coffee and tells Bechtel, "We build miracles just to repair them. They build tools to live." Bechtel answers softly, "Maybe that's genius, not to win, but to keep going." For the German engineers, this day becomes a quiet revelation. For the first time in the war, they feel not superiority, but respect. The Sherman does not seek glory. It simply works. Kämpft nicht für Ruhm, sondern für Zuverlässigkeit. It fights not for glory, but for reliability. At dusk, steam rises from the exhaust. Schäfer places his hand on the armor and says, "Vielleicht ist das die Zukunft, Maschinen, die nicht lügen." Maybe this is the future, machines that don't lie. Archival footage shows the Sherman crawling away, tracks cutting long lines across wet clay, the sound of the engine fading into the trees. Birds scatter into the pale sky. For a moment, the war feels less like destruction and more like a test of how much endurance humans can build into iron. Fährt noch, und wir lernen. It still drives, and we're still learning. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, April 20th, 1943. At dawn, a special delegation arrives from Berlin. Representatives of the Ministry of Armaments, Panzer Corps officers, and 2 engineers from MAN, the company that builds the Panther. 3 tanks stand on the concrete strip, a Panzer IV OSF, G, a Panther D, and the captured Sherman M4A2. The rising sun glints on their armor. The air is thick with tension. Today's test is not about engineering. It's about pride. The officers circle the Sherman, faces hard. Someone chuckles. Zu groß, zu einfach, zu amerikanisch. Too big, too simple, too American. But the engineers remain silent. They already know appearances lie. Dr. Kurt Schäfer places a hand on the Sherman's hull. Große Maschinen sind nicht dumm. Sie sind ehrlich. Big machines are not stupid. They are honest. The Panther weighs 45 tons, armed with a high-velocity 75mm gun. The Sherman, 30 tons, same caliber but shorter barrel. The Panzer IV, 25 tons. German officers boast of their superior armor and balance. But when the engineers measure ground pressure, the Sherman performs best, lighter, wider, more mobile. Sinkt nicht. It doesn't sink. A technician taps each hull with a hammer. The Sherman's front plate gives a dull, even thud. The Panther's ring sharp, almost brittle. Bechtel notes quietly, cast armor absorbs shock better, fewer cracks, cheaper to produce. The Berlin officer snaps, cheaper doesn't mean better. Schäfer answers calmly, sometimes it means exactly that. When the hatch is open, the difference is undeniable. German tanks, cramped, sharp corners, tangled controls, half the instruments hidden behind levers. The Sherman, bright, ventilated, spacious, spring-mounted seats, wide viewports, logical layout. A young engineer smirks. Unsere Panzer sind für Helden. Dieser ist für Menschen. Our tanks are built for heroes. This one is built for humans. At the command, starten. All 3 engines ignite. The Panther coughs, rattles, belches smoke. The Panzer IV growls, stumbles, steadies. The Sherman simply starts, steady, smooth, almost quiet. Atmet, sie schreien. It breathes. They scream. For the first time, admiration replaces irony. The Sherman's VVSS suspension glides over uneven ground. The Panther's complex torsion bars bounce violently, its heavy hull rocking like a ship. Comfort ist nicht Luxus, sondern Präzision. Comfort is not luxury, it's precision. Schäfer writes, the Americans achieved smoothness without cost. We achieved complexity without purpose. Then comes the maintenance test. Replace a track and a fuel filter. The Sherman, 15 minutes. The Panther, 1 hour 40 minutes. The Panzer IV, just under an hour. When the times are read aloud, the delegation falls silent. Seconds stretch. In the officers' lounge afterward, the debate erupts. Our technology is the pinnacle of engineering. Yes, but who repairs it in the field? Our men, heroes. And if there are no heroes left? Schäfer murmurs, dann gewinnt, wer weniger Helden braucht. Then victory belongs to the one who needs fewer heroes. On the firing range, the Sherman and Panzer IV fire at 800 meters. Accuracy, nearly equal. But the Sherman reloads faster, thanks to better ammunition layout and a stabilizer. The Panther hits harder, but slower. Sie bauen Waffen. Wir bauen Überzeugungen. They build weapons. We build convictions. Then a final test. A Panther fires its 75mm at the Sherman. The shot penetrates, yet the Sherman's engine keeps running. Hydraulics intact. No explosion. Will nicht sterben. It doesn't want to die. Schäfer writes in his notebook. Even damaged, the Sherman remains functional. Perhaps that is why the Americans win. They keep moving. 2 days later, report numbered 5443 is issued. Comparison: M4A2 Sherman, WW2 Panther. Conclusions: Sherman, best reliability and ease of maintenance. Panther, greatest firepower, impractical in use. Panzer IV, transitional model recommendation, simplify future German designs. At the bottom, Schaefer signs, genius lies not in power, but in reproducibility. The report reaches Berlin. Goering receives a copy marked, engineers express admiration for the enemy. The reply arrives a week later. Bewunderung ist Verrat. Admiration is treason. Schaefer reads it, smiles bitterly, and whispers, then we've already lost. The camera lingers on the 3 tanks, standing side by side. German pride, German ambition, American practicality. As the sun sets, the Sherman's engine still hums. The Panther is cold. The Panzerwehr smokes faintly. Manchmal ist der Sieg nur, dass du weiterfährst. Sometimes victory is simply that you keep going. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, April 26, 1943. A cold fog hangs over the field. The only sounds, the creak of metal, the hum of generators, and the distant echo of artillery tests from another range. Today, Sherman number 220 will face German guns. Dr. Kurt Schaefer stands beside a ballistics officer and says quietly, Wir werden sehen, ob sein Herz aus Stahl oder aus Glauben ist. We'll see whether its heart is made of steel or of faith. Engineers surround the tank. It's mounted on a reinforced concrete platform. The hatches are sealed. Inside sit mannequin crewmen fitted with sensors. The goal, to study the armor's behavior, internal shock waves, and system integrity under fire. Dozens of cables run from the hull, temperature, pressure, vibration. The artillery captain mutters, "We don't usually test the enemy, we just destroy him." Schaefer answers, "Today we learn, not avenge." From 800 meters, the first PK-40 round fires. The shell slams into the front plate at a 45 degrees angle. The explosion rips through the mist. A deep, heavy thud that shakes the ground. When the smoke clears, everyone leans forward. No penetration, only a dent and a scorch mark. "Unmöglich," whispers an engineer. "Impossible." Schaefer walks up and places his hand on the armor. Warm, but unbroken. The next shots hit the sides and rear. Some penetrate, but inside, the cabin remains intact. The mannequins are undisturbed, the panels still attached. In the report appears a line. Side penetration at 600 Bastard, no secondary explosion, engine compartment intact. Schaefer lowers his binoculars. Verliert Haut, aber nicht das Leben. It loses skin, but not life. They place 50 kilos of explosives under the left track, a mine simulation. The blast rattles the test yard, a column of dust rising into the air. When it clears, one track gone, but the hull unbroken. The engine still sits firmly in place. Jeder Panther wäre auseinandergefallen. Any Panther would have come apart. Schaefer gives a weary smile. And that's why they build 10 a day, and we build 1 a month. To test the fuel system, the Sherman is doused in gasoline and set alight. Flames roar around the turret, the air shimmers with heat. 10 minutes later, the metal glows red, but still, no detonation. The reason? Dry, insulated fuel tanks, a safety design the Germans had never adopted. Sie dachten an den Tod und haben ihn verhindert. They thought about death and prevented it. When the fire dies, the engineers open the hatch. Soot everywhere, the stench of burnt rubber, but everything inside remains in place. The engine, blackened, choking, starts again after a few turns. Ist verwundet, aber nicht besiegt. It's wounded, but not defeated. In the report appears another note. Even after repeated damage, tank remains operational. American philosophy: anything can be repaired if it's still alive. The range falls silent. No laughter now. The mechanics who once mocked the Iron Barn speak with quiet respect. Kämpft weiter. It keeps fighting. Bechtel writes in his notebook, "This tank doesn't fight with rage. It simply lives." Test report, M4A2 Sherman. Date, April 26, 1943. Location, Kummersdorf. Results, running gear partially damaged after explosion, still drivable. Armor shows remarkable ductility. Interior maintains integrity under heat. Conclusion, the tank is not beautiful, but unbreakable. Signed, Dr. K. Schaefer. That evening, Schaefer stays alone in the hangar. The Sherman's hull bears dozens of scars, dents, holes, scorch marks, yet it stands whole. He runs his hand over the metal and says softly, "Wir haben die Kunst der Zerstörung gemeistert, Sie die Kunst des Überlebens." We mastered the art of destruction, they the art of survival. In his notes later, he writes, "Metal behaves like man. Ours breaks when bent, theirs bends when broken." That line will become the epigraph of the entire Sherman report in the Kummersdorf archives. The report reaches the Ministry of Armaments. A week later, a reply arrives. Erkenntnisse interessant, aber nicht im Einklang mit deutscher Philosophie. Findings are interesting, but not consistent with German philosophy. Schaefer reads it, places a dot on the page, and murmurs, "Philosophy doesn't move, but this tank does." The camera glides over the battered hull of Sherman number 220, pitted, scorched, torn, yet still whole. Papers rustle on the table in the wind. Hielt dem Feuer stand, wir nicht. It endured the fire. We did not. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, May 2nd, 1943. Dawn. Fog drifts low across the range, like smoke after battle. Inside hangar number 3, piles of papers, tables, and blueprints fill the room. The engineers are finishing their final report on the captured Sherman M4A2. Everything looks ordinary: pencils, folders, ink bottles. But this report marks the first time in the war that German engineers admit the Americans did not build better, they built smarter. Ein Panzer, der nicht aufhört, nur weil der Krieg es will. A tank that doesn't stop just because the war tells it to. In the long haul, engineers sit in silence. Each man is responsible for a section: mobility, engine, electrics, armor, ergonomics. Photographs of shell impacts and microfractures hang on the wall. Bechtel flips through a protocol sheet and asks, "Doctor, sollen wir die Wahrheit schreiben oder den Bericht? Doctor, are we writing the truth or the report?" Schaefer answers without looking up. "Wir schreiben Fakten. Sie werden selbst Wahrheit. We'll write facts. They'll become the truth on their own." The technical entry reads plainly. Type: General Motors, 6046 power, 375 PS at 2100 RPM fuel. Diesel evaluation: high reliability, easy maintenance. Schaefer's comment in the margin: runs on any fuel, requires no precise tuning. The engine forgives mistakes, ours demands loyalty. And beneath that, written softly in pencil: Vielleicht ist Nachsicht auch eine Tugend. Perhaps lenience is also a virtue. Another section reads, hydraulic assist, soft shifting, allows an untrained driver to master the vehicle within 5 hours. Bechtel adds a line that later becomes famous in the archives. Verlangt keine Meister, nur Menschen. It requires no masters, only men. 32 lines of measurements follow: thickness, slope, alloy composition. But Schaefer's personal note breaks the monotony. American armor is as flexible as morality. It yields, but does not break. He underlines another observation. Cast hull Surkjog, less stress, faster production, fewer weld failures. Unsere Panzer sind Kunstwerke, ihre Werkzeuge. Our tanks are works of art, theirs are tools. The ergonomics section surprises even the most skeptical. Crew space generous, well lit, ventilated. Commander has clear visibility. Color coding reduces stress and error. Bechtel adds a quiet conclusion. Sie bauen nicht für Helden, sondern für Heimkehrer. They build not for heroes, but for those meant to return home. Another line, destined for citation in post-war reports. Trotz mehrerer Treffer und Explosionen blieb der Motor betriebsbereit. Despite multiple hits and explosions, the engine remained operational. A Berlin officer scoffs, "Impossible. Any of our tanks would have burned." Schaefer replies evenly, "That's why they can afford to fight every day." The report continues. Sherman M4, production time 40 days. Panther, 168. The difference lies not in resources, but in philosophy. Schaefer's handwritten summary, "Wir bauen Juwelen, sie bauen Armeen." We build jewels, they build armies. At the bottom, in pencil, "Wir haben Präzision, sie haben Zuverlässigkeit." We have precision, they have reliability. When the report is typed and printed in triplicate, the engineers sign it one by one, in silence. No Heil Hitler, no slogans, only fatigue and understanding. Bechtel says quietly, "Wir haben die Wahrheit im Feind gefunden." We found truth in the enemy. Schäfer answers, "Nein, wir fanden sie in der Arbeit." No, we found it in our work. The 3 brown folders marked "Vertraulich," "Confidential," are sealed and sent to Berlin. As the courier leaves, Schäfer watches the car disappear in the fog. Vielleicht ist das unser ehrlichster Bericht im ganzen Krieg. Perhaps this is our most honest report of the entire war. 2 days later, the reply arrives. Erhalten, zur Kenntnisnahme, received, noted. And then, silence. The report is forgotten until 1945, when American soldiers discover it in the ruins of the archives. On the back of one sheet, written faintly in pencil, "Wenn ein Feind uns zum Denken bringt, war kein Feind. If an enemy makes us think, he was never an enemy." No one ever confessed to writing it. The camera drifts over the desks, ink stains, rulers, fingerprints. Through the window, the Sherman stands alone in the sun, silent, dented, proud. As the engineers leave, one light remains on, reflecting off the papers that changed how they saw war. Vielleicht schreiben wir nicht über sie. Vielleicht wir schreiben über uns. Maybe we aren't writing about them. Maybe we're writing about ourselves. May 1943, Germany. By order of the Ministry of Armaments, Dr. Kurt Schaefer is sent on a special industrial inspection. His mission, to study whether Germany can adopt the mass production philosophy that the Sherman revealed. He is given 3 assistants and a route through the factories of MAN, Henschel and Daimler-Benz. Wir wollten verstehen, warum sie mehr haben, nicht warum sie besser sind. We wanted to understand why they have more, not why they are better. MAN Factory, Nuremberg. The delegation arrives amid the hammering of presses, steam, and the smell of oil. On the assembly line, a Panther, half-assembled, each piece filed and fitted by hand to microns of precision. The workers look more like jewelers than soldiers' craftsmen. Schaefer exhales, quietly. Jeder unserer Panzer ist ein Unikat. Every one of our tanks is a unique piece. He unrolls a blueprint of the Sherman, standardized bolts, modular components, interchangeable systems. The German engineers shake their heads. That's impossible. We'd lose quality. Schaefer answers. Maybe that's exactly what we need, to lose quality, to regain strength. Henschel plant. Castle rows of Tiger tanks dominate the floor. Huge armor plates swing from cranes. A banner above the hall reads, Deutsche Präzision siegt. German precision wins. Schaefer studies the poster, then mutters, if that were true, we'd have already won. He measures the production time. Tiger, 3,000 man-hours. Sherman, on 500. The Tiger depends on 22 suppliers. The Sherman, only 7. Sie bauen Krieg, wir bauen Kunst. They build war, we build art. Daimler-Benz, Berlin. In the conference room, Schaefer presents the idea of modular design, unified components that fit across all models. The chief engineer frowns. But then any farmer could repair a tank. Schaefer smiles. Genau das ist der Punkt. That's the point. Silence follows. A silence heavy with realization. At the Reich Supply Office, they show him production figures. March 1943, Germany, 252 tanks. United States, 1,700 Shermans. Schaefer stares at the numbers. That's what a democracy of steel looks like, when everyone can build it. At the factory gates, an old machinist approaches him. Doctor, I've made gears for 20 years. My son's in the army. He repairs Shermans. Says they're easier than bicycles, and they don't break. Schaefer replies softly, then both of you work for the one who will win. Mid-May. In his diary, Schaefer writes, the Americans won not with guns, but with tolerances. They allowed their mistakes to work. We tried to eliminate ours. He realizes that perfection is the enemy of progress. Ein perfekter Panzer existiert nicht, ein produzierbarer schon. A perfect tank doesn't exist, but a producible one does. Return to Berlin. Before a panel of armament generals, Schaefer gives his report. If we wish to win, we must build tools, not miracles. A general slams his fist on the table. You propose we abandon the German spirit? Schaefer answers calmly, no. I propose we let it survive. Later that evening, he receives an unofficial memo. Ihre Auffassung widerspricht der Linie der Führung. Your views contradict the party's line. He folds the paper, smiles faintly. A line is straight. Life never is. At night, he stands by the hotel window, watching factory smoke drift above the rooftops. He writes one last note in his wartime diary. The Americans fight the way we work. We must learn to fight the way they build. Simply, steadily, reliably. It will be his final wartime entry. A week later, in Kummersdorf, the Sherman is started again. Just a test, no maintenance for 3 weeks. It fires up on the first try. The Germans stand in silence. A mechanic murmurs, weiß nicht, dass ein Feind ist. It doesn't know it's an enemy. Schaefer's mass production report is quietly shelved. But 2 years later, the same ideas resurface in the post-war E-series, Germany's first standardized tank designs. The American philosophy had already taken root. The camera glides through the factory floor, machines roaring, sparks flying, and in the faces of the workers, a new kind of realization. Nicht der Stahl hat uns besiegt, die Einfachheit. It wasn't steel that defeated us, it was simplicity. 1952, Hamburg. The Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg hums again, but now it builds tractors and generators, not armored beasts. In the corner office sits an old man with silver hair, Dr. Kurt Schaefer. On his desk lies a worn folder marked M4A2 Sherman, 1943. He opens it. The pages smell of oil and dust. In the margins, his own faded handwriting, Wir haben Präzision. Sie haben Zuverlässigkeit. We had precision. They had reliability. He smiles for the first time in years, calmly. He takes up his pen and begins a letter to his old colleague, Walter Bechtel, now an engineer in West Berlin. Lieber Walter, sometimes I think the war was our greatest test, not because of death, but because of truth. Do you remember the Sherman? I believe it was more honest than we were. He seals the envelope. On his face, the quiet peace of a man who has finally spoken a prayer he carried for 10 years. A week later, a reply arrives. Kurt, I remember. I remember the day we laughed, and the moment it moved. I think we all understood then that war is not a matter of weapons, but of time, and they had more of it. Inside the envelope is a photograph. An American Sherman, restored, painted a soft green, serving with the French army in a colony. On the side, one word, Liberté. Lebt noch, Kurt. Und wir? It's still alive, Kurt. Are we? That same week, Schaefer begins to write a book, unofficial, unpublished, just for himself. Its title, Maschinen die überleben. Machines that survive. In the preface, he writes, "We lost the war, perhaps because we understood it too well. The Americans made war incomprehensible. They turned it into mathematics, into standards, into production, into order stronger than genius." He describes the first time he heard the Sherman's engine, how he held its simple bolts in his hands, and how he realized that simplicity isn't primitiveness, it's confidence. They weren't afraid their tank would be too simple. They were afraid it wouldn't work. 1954, Stuttgart. At an engineering conference, former Kummersdorf engineers present a new design, Leopard de Fern, lightweight, repairable, efficient, built around accessibility and speed of production. A spectator remarks, "It's a Sherman, but German." Schaefer replies, "Maybe, but now we understand why it was that way." In the twilight of his life, Schaefer receives an invitation from Britain to visit the Imperial War Museum in London. There stands a Sherman, freshly restored in Allied colours. He walks up to it, lays his hand on the armour. Cameras flash, tourists whisper. But for him, time disappears. He's back in Kummersdorf, the engine breathing softly under his palm. Du bist nie gefallen. You never fell. 1958. In his diary, Schaefer writes his final line. "I once thought engineering was power, but it is character, and the character of the Sherman is patience." He closes the notebook, places his coffee beside it, and gazes out at the rain. Beyond the glass lies a world that no longer needs heroic engineers, only reliable hands. 1961. Walter Bechtel passes away. His son, now a Bundeswehr soldier, trains alongside Americans in Bavaria. During one exercise, he poses for a photo beside an old Sherman, still in service, smiling, not knowing the history between his father and that machine. The photograph will later rest in Kurt Schaefer's album, the last page of his book. The camera lingers on the desk, papers, ink stains, the photo of the Sherman under glass. Outside, rain falls softly. On the open diary lies the final line, written in careful script. War unser Feind, aber lehrte uns zu denken. He was our enemy, but he taught us to think. 1965. Germany reborn. Factories hum again, this time for the West. In Koblenz, a NATO engineers conference gathers under a new banner. On the poster stand, 3 silhouettes. Leopard 1, Centurion, M48 Patton. The slogan reads, "Reliability wins wars." In the front row sits Dr. Kurt Schaefer, old now, hair white, hands trembling. But when the screen lights up with the image of a Sherman, he straightens, as if greeting an old friend. After the war, young German engineers trained in Allied schools absorbed the same lessons their fathers had learned in Kummersdorf: standardization, simplicity, repairability. The new Leopard de Huond 1965 was born not as a weapon of domination, but as a machine of survival. Its design was straightforward, its engine reliable, every component built for quick replacement. All the things they once mocked in the Sherman. Erinnerung wird Mechanik. Memory becomes mechanics. In the U.S. archives, someone uncovers Schaefer's 1943 report. A note appears in the margin, written by an American officer. Even their engineers respected it. That's the highest compliment a machine can get. The quote is later printed in Armor Quarterly, 1959, and the name of a German engineer who once studied his enemy becomes part of the American legend. By the 1970s, the Sherman no longer fights, but its philosophy endures. In Turkish armor, in British tanks, in the Israeli Super Sherman, simplicity, serviceability, survivability no longer compromises, but standards. Krieg hat uns getrennt, aber Mechanik hat uns geeint. War divided us, but mechanics united us. 1967, Bonn. At the Technical University, Schaefer gives his last public lecture. He steps to the chalkboard, holding a piece of white chalk. I once saw 3 machines standing side by side, the Panzer, the Panther, and the Sherman. 2 were more perfect, but only 1 came home. He draws a circle, splits it in half, labels it: complexity, left; reliability, right. Never mistake precision for wisdom. 1971, Hamburg. A reunion of wartime engineers, the surviving men of Kummersdorf. They raise their glasses not to victory, but to understanding. Schaefer offers a toast. Wir haben verloren, damit die Maschinen gewinnen. We lost so that the machines could win. A year later, he is gone. Among his papers, they find a single folded sheet, a small photograph of a Sherman, and 3 words written beneath it: war mein Lehrer. He was my teacher. The note is sent to the museum in Dresden, where it rests today beside fragments of armor under dim, respectful light. The film shifts to color. Archival photos flicker. Sherman on the assembly line, Sherman in the mud, Sherman standing as a monument in front of post-war French schools. A narrator's voice, quiet, reflective. A tank is not a symbol of war. It is a mirror of its age, where metal teaches humanity. On screen, the final caption appears: from Kummersdorf to Detroit, from steel to spirit. The machine that refused to die taught the world how to live. And below, almost invisible, the last German line: war unser Feind, aber hat uns menschlich gemacht. He was our enemy, but he made us human.